Hello, and welcome to Painting Films, Amateur Painting Tutorials. My name is Jason, and I'm glad that you joined me for this very special presentation. For this film, rather than using oils, which I typically use, I will be using acrylic paints for the first time ever on film. And I will be showing you how to paint mountains with a nice landscape to accompany it. You may be wondering, why am I using acrylics this time? And the fact is, I've been invited to do a special presentation with some students who are interested in learning how to paint mountains. And so therefore, I am doing a practice run here of how I will show them how to use acrylics, because they dry quicker and the students will be able to take their projects home with them. So I hope you enjoy the film, as the colors that I used are being run across the screen here. From titanium white, to black, to two different kinds of blue, both Prussian, as well as phthalo blue. I also used crimson, and a yellow, known as yellow medium. The canvas I used in this particular film is an 18 by 24 inch canvas. I did nothing to prepare it, as you will see. So here I'm about to make a sky using phthalo blue, a touch of Prussian blue, and titanium white. One of the advantages as well as disadvantages of acrylics is that they dry very, very quickly, which means I need to move really, really fast. So I get this sky done in just a few minutes. I add in streaks of white just to make sure that the sky is not too flat or too dull. Now I get ready to mix my mountain colors. So I use crimson, Prussian blue, a touch of phthalo blue, and titanium white to varying degrees, because I want it to be lighter the further away that it is. So here I have my lightest value. I do a nice sharp edge at the top and brush it out to a mist at the bottom, similar to perhaps what you've seen from Bob Ross. Now I darken for my second mountain. I didn't think it was quite dark enough, so as you see, I added some black while the acrylic was still wet. If you don't get it on time while it's still wet, you should wait for it to dry and then just redo it. While it's still wet, I add some white at the bottom for mist. And finally, I get the mountain that's the closest to us with a very, very dark base color. You may notice I'm using a much bigger brush here. I add in white at the bottom and get ready now to go ahead and add my highlights. But before I do that, I wanted to make sure I had my foothills in place. Knowing that the further something gets from the viewer, the bluer it'll get, I wanted the foothills in the background to be grayer and bluer with less yellow, and the ones in the foreground to have more yellow in them, and to look more like the green one might expect when they see grassy hills. There is some separation between the hills with lighter colors at the base, because again, that's what happens in the atmosphere when we look into the distance. As you can see now, the mountains have already dried, and now I proceed to put the highlights and the shadows on them. For this most distant mountain, it's not just straight titanium white. I actually touched it with a hint of blue, just because, again, of the distance. For my shadow color, I used a mix of Prussian blue, phthalo blue, and titanium white. And I'm softening up the bottom by tapping it with a brush. Now I add more shadow to the mountain that's the second furthest away. One of the things that I noticed as I was working with these acrylics that's very, very different from oil paints, for those of us who are used to those, is that it doesn't break the way I'm used to oil paint breaking, because the paint itself is much more liquid. It flows much easier. Because of this, I had to adapt, and I realized that holding my palette knife almost perpendicular to the canvas gave me much better results, until the paint itself started to become a little bit tackier. At that point, I was able to lay it flatter like I normally do with oil paint. As we can see here, I'm now putting in the shadows for the mountain that's the closest to us. And if I might say so, I was the most pleased with this mountain. I was starting to get the hang of using the palette knife with the acrylics at this point. This is why I did this practice. I wanted to figure these things out before I did them in front of a class. Now I put the highlights on the sun side, which in this painting happens to be to the right. And you can't tell because of the time-lapse photography, but at this point I am really scraping hard with that white. I've become very, very comfortable with it, as well as the blue that I'm touching up with, and really pushing that blade into the canvas. Here I am adding some very, very distant tree lines, using a very, very light mix of green. The green that I mix typically has yellow, black, Prussian blue, and white. Before I got too deep, though, in making background trees, I decided to put a few evergreens in the foreground, just to give the painting a little bit more character and a little bit more places for the viewer to focus their interest. I put in another tree line, very simply with a fan brush, an old beat up fan brush at that, which is very, very useful for things like this, because it naturally makes wispy lines. I put some highlights, just whitening the paint. And then I realized I need more color. And thinking back to my visit to Austria and to Germany back in 2017, I figured some flowers growing on these hills would not be out of place at all. And so I started throwing in some colors using the paint that I had left over. But the more that I used them, the more that I realized they didn't have to be flowers, they could be grass too. It's all an optical illusion anyways. I just wanted there to be some sparkle in the foreground for the viewer. Finally, I thought the sky was just too dull at the point of finishing, so I just threw in these clouds. All I did was brush out some titanium white straight onto the canvas until it was nice and wispy. And this is what it looks like when it was finished. The total time for this project was about an hour and a half. Longer than I want for the students, but necessary just because I was practicing. The next time I do it, I think will be much, much quicker. As always, I appreciate you watching these movies, and hope you'll tell a friend if you like them. If you do like them, please become a subscriber. Your support lets me know that I'm doing things that you like, and I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.